Welcome to our Friday, first Friday in February, Building a School for the 21st Century. Our league would like to welcome you. I'm Julie Roy, and I'm the president of the Concord League. And before I introduce our moderator, who will introduce our wonderful panel, I'd like to tell you about one other event that is happening soon that might be of interest to you. Concord Carlisle League is again coaching a Civics B team for a Civics B that includes Weston, Wayland, and Sudbury, and as of last year, Concord and Carlisle, and we won on our first year last year, which shocked everyone. But we'll be fielding a team again this year. The B is on March 8th at Lincoln Sudbury High School at 2 p.m. And the special topic this year is voting rights in honor of the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. I believe there's a section particularly on the suffrage movement as part of the B. And our kids would love it if you came to support them. It will also be filmed for Minuteman Media Network, I believe. So, before we get started, I also have been asked to tell you that there will be handouts on the white table over here for several of the speakers. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the morning, Ruth Lauer. Ruth is a longtime Concord resident, and I'm going to insert my own joke here and ask any of you who don't know Ruth, please raise your hand. That's what I thought. She has served as a select man prior to the select board nomenclature, and as a member of the school committee, followed by working in the town manager's office. She is a league member of long standing who has served 2 terms as our president, 1 as co-president, and as a board member at several other intervals. We are not listing her many other contributions to our town because we have a program to get to. But Ruth is a wonderful part of our town, and I now turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I bring you greetings on this post-Groundhog Spring Day. I love New England. So we know the League is an organization of issues and action, but we focus on informed action. And this morning will be an opportunity to continue to learn about the Concord Middle School Building Committee and schedule and process. This issue will have huge implications for the town, for our kids, for our pocketbooks, and it's important for us to know as much as we can. If you have lived in Concord a while, you know that we have a long history of studying and agonizing before undertaking any new construction. Usually, the greater community is unaware that schools are cobbling together bits and pieces in those buildings to prolong the life of each building until we're faced with a pressing need to build new or substantially remodel. Well, each school building addressed Alcott, Thoreau, Willard, High School, let's skip the high school for a minute, was at or approaching 50 years of life, which is the typical design life in New England. It was usually a surprise to the greater community when the issue of school buildings needs became public. But the League has thought about it and worried about it and fussed about it for a long time. Early on, the League undertook, while the school system was a K-6 system, the League undertook a study of K-3 for 8, and the proverbial hit the fan. We'll just let it hit that. Then we had the open plan, Peabody, open plan, Ripley, and before grappling with Alcott, there was a study and a report called No Stone Unturned. It was a plan to redistrict the overflowing Alcott population into other buildings. Again, it was exciting. Later, there was a facilities plan committee. And the key word of that study was swing school. Does anybody remember swing school? Again, the greater community was paying attention. Alcott, Thoreau, and Willard were followed by the high school, and we come now to preparing for a new middle school for the 21st century. Much later than was forecast in the year 2004, thanks to the school's good use of what we call modular classrooms, and they call something else. And of course, the census helped us a little bit. So, we come to 2019 town meeting, I think Article 14, approves a feasibility study to explore the construction of a new middle school building committee to replace the current facilities. Based on the findings of the feasibility study, the committee will be charged to begin the schematic design for a new building. And the town will be asked later, and later is sooner than you think, the town will be asked later, once we have a schematic design, to approve design and construction. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But the community pays attention, and here we are. One opportunity more to meet with people who can help us understand the major components of the work ahead. In my head, those major components are educational visioning, building design, and sustainability. And we have people here who can speak to those issues. At the conclusion of the presentation, remember what I said there? Conclusion. There will be time for questions. And as you sat down, you will have seen a 3x5 card on your chair. Please use that for taking notes on something that you're hearing and something that you're questioning as we go along. We don't want to miss a terrific question just because time has passed. So think of your question, write it down, and we won't miss what you have been concerned about or want to know more about. Our speakers will note that we have a timekeeper. Susie Brennan is right here in the front row.
Yep.
She will make her best efforts to keep us on schedule because we're very grateful that West Concord Union has made our space available, but it is time limited. We do not have all day. So we have to focus on what we need to do in the time allowed. So, many leaguers, no, I'll say that, Joe, never mind. But if we have time, ask me about Evelyn Sook. Okay. So, Dr. Lori Hunter, our first speaker, has served as the superintendent of Concord School District since 2017. Partnerships throughout the community are one of her primary professional goals, as can be deduced simply by the number of times that she has made herself available to community groups such as ourselves at meetings such as this morning. Dr. Hunter.
Thank you. So one, we're really grateful for the opportunity. I think we're really trying to be sure that this is a community discussion right from the beginning of the process. And I know you're all very familiar with some of the challenges of the high school, and I think we want to be sure we're ahead of that and learned lessons from some of those communication issues. And so I think today's a great opportunity to begin to put information in front of you. That said, we're really early in the process, so it really is a dialogue and a conversation and a discussion, and that's intentional. So keep that in mind, because we're going to be talking at a really high level of conceptual, and we don't have all the answers figured out. And that's why we were grateful for the opportunity to come today, because we're in that early phase, and the timing is right to give us the feedback. The other thing I'm grateful for is that on a very rare opportunity, you came and asked me just to talk about education. That's a unique thing for me, and it's actually why I'm here. So it's the teacher and principal in me is really grateful to have that chance, because the middle school is really such a catalyst for us to think forward and what we want education to be over the next 50 years. And that's efforts we're already underway with in our strategic plan and have goals and initiatives. And the real point of what we're going to try to do at the middle school, I think what's already happening is we're going to be more concretely defining it at a little faster pace at the middle school, which will just continue to evolve and help us do differently and better with kids, because we use the word 21st century, it's 2020, right? I think we probably need another term. The world has changed so dramatically that the way we've been teaching kids traditionally is going to catch up with us and not prepare kids for the world they're entering. And you'll hear where some of our work has started to craft that vision. So my goal this morning was to share with you some of the vision we've started to craft. It's in its early phases, and still I've put a big draft all over it. Show you an example of a middle school we visited that's less than 5 years old that I think started to concretely bring to life some of the vision, and then thirdly give you a really concrete example of what the curriculum, student engagement, and activities look like. And I actually got really fortunate that a fabulous middle school teacher gave me an example of what she's already trying to do, and it kind of led right into the space piece and why it's limited where she is at Sanborn. So one other quick update before I get into the forward thinking part. I want to be sure we frame the fact that we did reconfigure the 2 middle school buildings this fall. So we've opened Peabody this fall as a 6th grade only building for the first time, and really worked to onboard kids into the middle school in a different and new way that really considers it a transition and helps to prepare them for middle school and not just drop them in the way we felt like we had been. So there's new curriculum in place there, there's a different approach there, a new mindset that we feel really strongly is benefiting 11-year-olds as they leave the elementary schools. And Sanborn is now all 7th and 8th grade. So similar there, and the benefit of having all the kids together by grade level also allows all of our teachers to be together across grade levels. And you'll hear me reference teams throughout this discussion, because really the vision is that our kids are on teams of teachers. That's a true middle school environment versus a junior high environment. I'm going to say we're working really hard at that. I think we've got it figured out at Peabody because we've got the room. Sanborn, we're sort of band-aiding as best we can, but we just can't pull it all together because the building's just not laid out the way a team structure would be, and I'll show you some examples of what that might look if it were to be different. So, in terms of the visioning process we've been using, we actually got ahead of this last spring before town meeting and before all of it, knowing no matter what, it was an important conversation. So a small representative group of us, school committee, parents, staff, a facilitator, really sat together and started to look at research and examples, a large sample of student survey data and parent survey data, and really try to get to paper what the vision would be going forward. And like I said, this wouldn't just be for the middle school, it would be for every facility, but we're very middle school focused in this conversation, and certainly we were in this small group. We held a public forum and invited the community to come in and tell us what they thought education needed to look like at a high level, and what perhaps the building needed to offer to foster that opportunity. We started to synthesize that and to look at the elements that we as a community deemed. There's a lot of research out there about what those items were, but we started to take that research and apply it to what we thought Concord valued and thought was important. And we really came up with 8 core principles as we synthesized, and have tried to put together short descriptions. Again, this is all big words, drafts all over it. And then we left that into what we hoped the building would do to support those opportunities and to really create an environment conducive to the vision. So So if you don't, I don't know who's clicking for, is it you, Carlin? Yeah, now you can go to the visual thing. So if you look at the visual, and I love that this is the way this got presented, and it's so different than my learning style, we've been able to put it together, that this was the gifts of the other folks in the group, but really speaks to now that we have the visual. So you can see the 8 principles that we named: wellness, choice, and I'm going to get into each of these in a minute, collaboration, flexibility, authenticity, inclusivity, engagement, and balance. And so those are the core principles while we interweave higher level aspects that we want to be sure are integrated throughout. So that would be rigor. We're not saying any of this is expecting to do less in terms of performance and truly challenging and meeting the demands of a high performing district. Security. That comes with lots of sorts of meanings and nuances to it, both in terms of physical security in a day and age where that's a primary goal in schools, but also about emotional and other kinds of security. Lasting being sustainability in a different way than it's written there. Lasting in terms of we can maintain it. It's not just dependent on a leader or a set of teachers, but something that becomes institutionalized. Sustainability is exactly in terms of environmental and making sure that's our priority. That's a different presentation, I won't do that one today, but we're really engaging in a lot of different sustainable efforts and trying to be sure our kids are including that in the work that they do at the school level, but also the work they're bringing back to the community and to their own homes. And then my absolute favorite, this is out of our mission statement as well, but if all of this is not under an umbrella of just joy, of being at school and of learning and of being with others, I really don't think we're meeting our goals. So the word joy is, I think, front and center, and the other things become a vehicle to that. So if we go to the descriptions, Carlin, thank you. And this you'll hear starts to weave in the way a new school would support these components. So under collaboration, we want to be sure we've got furniture and spaces designed for a wide range of experiences and modes to prepare students to be effective. I'm going to stress the word flexible because that is going to come up over and over. It's the next point, but it's just as much about creating ways that the furniture allows collaboration. You don't want rows of desks that can't be moved around and shifted so that kids can work in groups or partners. Further, under flexibility, various room sizes with the ability to combine or divide spaces, different kinds of teaching modes and learning styles, planning ahead, and we're certainly running all of the data points that need to get factored into this to facilitate any expansion and long-term needs of the school, so you don't box yourself in. Authenticity, we want an environment with real and warm materials, perhaps woods and fabrics, and we certainly want to maximize nature. It's been such a fun piece to have the project managers and designers come in and spend some time on the site where Sanborn is, which would be where we build the new building, and just tell us how amazing that site is for nature opportunities and outdoor experiences. And they're already turning and spinning their wheels to give us new ideas in addition to the ones we already have. Inclusivity, I think this is one we really want to stress. And by barrier-free design, we mean that in multiple ways. We want to be sure children with different needs have accessibility to the entire school, which can look at all sorts of how does sound and noise factor in, how does accessibility to different spaces, especially if you have a range of kids with different disabilities or ways they come to school. And we want to be sure, for example, a cafeteria is a place every child can go and feel comfortable. Zoning for after school and community use, so inclusivity of the community in the building, and we've heard loud and clear that is a priority, that this building offer opportunities for use by the community. So that would require some flexible space and access, right, and making sure that the building's available after hours and on weekends. This one is going to be quite a discussion. I'll forecast an auditorium, potentially for a town meeting, that sort of thing, and we'll certainly be talking about how that plays into the big picture and cost and all of that. We're not that far yet. A cafeteria, we would hope that could hold, in a perfect world, the entire school, but if not, at least an entire grade. It's one of our biggest challenges in the two buildings right now. Principal Cameron really struggles to have a way to do larger group scaled events with kids because the space just isn't there to do so. And finally, under inclusivity, effective and intuitive circulation for connection and good communication. So you want a building that really fosters that ability to communicate, collaborate. Some of that's even just about sight lines and visibility, but it's also about flexible space throughout the building that can be all sorts of different things. I'll give you some examples of what that's looking like in some of the other new schools we've seen. Engagement, spaces for hands-on innovation, creativity, and joyful learning. One of our biggest goals coming out of all this is to provide students an opportunity to engage in a way that perhaps is not the traditional way. What we're finding right now, our kids are really good at coming in and going through the motions of traditional types of learning, and we need to find ways to engage them differently, where they're active and hands-on and project and problem-based and authentic to the real world around them, integrated across subjects, purposeful, collaborative, creative. That list could go on because in 2020 the world is so different. We don't know what we're preparing them for anymore, which as an educator is pretty frightening. It used to be pretty linear, and it's not anymore. We're building environments and curricula that really has to ask kids to be able to problem solve and creatively approach things, because we truly don't know what jobs might be available for them in 10 and 15 years. For example, who knew you were going to need somebody to run an Uber and have the app, and there's no hard, physical site to that kind of a company. So everything is different, and we need to be sure we're preparing kids. Green building, so this is where I will leave the rest to Kate and Matt in a few minutes to talk about sustainability. From our perspective educationally, we want that overlap to be with the curriculum and the building to be a teaching tool regarding sustainability. And a special defining space or a campus element. So that's really about making sure it's a unique building, reflecting Concord, reflecting where we are, having the kids have an attachment to it. I'll give you an example. When I was in Duxbury and we built a new school, they actually built the main hallway with the outline of Duxbury Beach along it. So when you were on the third floor, you could see the entire peninsula. It was really cool. And they even dropped a plover in because the plovers kept getting on the beach and restricting access, which was a little bit of a issue, but they dropped it. So, just bringing to life the way we are in Concord and certainly in this community, the rich environment around kids and bringing that into the school. Balance, fostering the full spectrum, and this, we could probably talk on each of these more thoroughly, and I'll just hit them at a high level. Technology and the challenges of the really strong, amazing asset that technology is to education, but in a balanced way, because our kids are on screens an awful lot, and we don't want that to become something that is negative, and we'd all admit that's a challenge right now, both in the schools and outside of the schools. Teacher-led and student-led balance. We want to empower our kids to be leaders of their own learning, where teachers then become facilitators, but that needs to be balanced with some direct instruction as well, so we're continually talking about that. Indoor and outdoor, again, the way I mentioned earlier, making sure we're expanding ourselves to the outside, and independent versus group work, and really fostering a nice balance of that. Wellness, again, we're looking at sustainable, high-performance school, and they're going to talk so much on this, I'll not even get into any of it. Comfort, acoustics, natural light, connection to the outdoors, and a school for the whole person where we're valuing all that kids bring to school and not just focused on academics. And then finally, choice. We really want to build opportunities for kids to have independence and autonomy and not just be all driving to the same product or process, really looking at the content and applying it in new and interesting ways to them. And I'll give you a great example of that in a few minutes, and then making sure we're offering different ways to get to that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, it's got options to it, and kids can go in ways that start to appeal to them. So as we start to look at the next slides, we went out and visited 6 or 8 middle schools so far, before we even had funding, because we just got excited about it. It was fun to go see what was out there. I think among our favorites of the bunch was Gates Middle School in Scituate. They took on a broad-based, problem-based learning approach. Project-based learning approach, which overlaps with problem-based. Project-based learning approach, and really immersed themselves in that for the years prior to the school opening. And what that fostered was an environment where kids are actively engaged in creating different ways to come at problems, which then embed the content in curriculum. They have to apply it, but then they also have to do the evaluation of how that impact was effective or not, and there's almost always an audience component to it. So they're purposefully doing it for each other, but in a really, hopefully more frequently, there's a bigger audience to it as well, and I'll give you an example of one that one of our middle school teachers just did that applies. So how does design fit into all of this? So this, I'm gonna frame this for you because what I really wished I had was like this 360-degree panoramic view of the school in Situate, because I'm gonna give you pieces of it and you sort of have to visually connect them to get the real feel for it. So teachers are in teams of the 4 content areas: English, math, science, and social studies that are, I'm gonna use the word pod just so you get a real sense of what it is, and it's all next to each other, so the kids aren't traveling wide ranges during the school day. Those teams are all located, connected with one another so that they're in a like space. And within the pod then, in the middle of the pod is what some of the designers are starting to call neighborhoods or flexible space, and it's no longer your traditional linear hallway. It's truly more in a round table kind of environment with classrooms all through. And in the middle becomes this flexible overflow space where kids are pouring out of classrooms to do projects together. The space is set up for that purpose, so you'll see, I'll try to show you, there's different presentation opportunities. They can, this is the technology gift, they can connect with the projector and put stuff up on the board, then look at it as a group and collectively manipulate and craft things to share with others. And it's just this really fluid school environment where there's a lot of opportunities for a large group, double-sized large group, I'll show you that in a minute, or really small group, and then they bring back to the larger group. So the bottom line is flexibility, and I want to be sure we clarify. You know, Peabody was built in a time of open space, and you're going to hear some things that sound similar to that. That was so far one way that we all lived where everything got retrofitted because it wasn't working. It was too open. There was no containment or options to close things back up. What all of the designers are saying to us now is they want some of that to be available, but not all the time. So we're watching designs where flexibility allows for opening of walls, but the walls can be just as easily closed back up again, and you get to a more traditional sized environment, or these breakout spaces where kids can go in smaller groups. We've been kind of challenging them on like what is noise like with that, if the wall was open and now it's closed, and literally we test it when there's kids in the room and one of us stands on one side, one stands on the other, and I'm like, oh yeah, we can't hear a thing. The engineering has come so far that it really does allow for contained spaces, but options to change that up in a lot of different ways. So you'll see that. A lot of open plans as well where glass is used to allow for that sightline and visibility, but it's also contained if you choose to make it that way. And we've talked a lot on distraction and all of that. What we saw in the classrooms we were in, because the mode of teaching had changed, it wasn't distracting because kids are actively, busily producing, doing, learning, collaborating. It's only distracting if the teacher's lecturing and you're trying to just get focused that way. Otherwise, it actually is very conducive to the environment. So quick highlights of the photos that I shared. Situate, again, we loved because they had so immersed themselves, and the project-based learning had lasting impact. They've had multiple changes in leadership, and when we visited, it was very clear that the teachers felt the value of the process because it didn't matter that the leadership had changed. It was so embedded in their approach. So this is a fairly typical classroom for them. You'll see kids are no longer in desks, they're at tables, the chairs move around. Other classrooms we've seen have desks that move so you can collaborate them together or split them apart. Those will be choices we get to make. Always a presentation space, and we're going to be discussing what our best option is to have kids be able to share with each other. It's a little different than just assuming the teacher's presenting. The mindset is the kids are going to be presenting to each other, so making sure we can allow that. You'll see the glass there is actually the doorway. It leads into that big open pod kind of environment I was talking about, which Carla, why don't you see the next slide and we'll try to highlight that. This is the adjoining classroom before we get to the pod space. That white wall actually collapses and they can have a double-sized classroom. So the integration of the two is what you'd hope for. So let's zip through these because I'm already running out of time. This is the pod space. You can see there's different sized opportunities there. And this is another part of the pod space. So try to imagine those classrooms with all this around what is being shown here, with a lot of breakout opportunities for kids. So this is the example I wanted to bring. This is from one of our 7th grade science teachers at Sanborn. And I think this project gives you a taste of what it could be. Again, she got limited because of a lot of different things, including structure, size, space, all of it. But this was her energy fair, where the kids all I know, Kate, they love this project over there. They selected a type of energy that they were going to learn more about, with the goal of teaching it to their classmates, both in terms of a presentation board, but also in terms of some sort of modeling of it. What I then was there to watch were the kids circulating the room, learning from the presentation board and the modeling of it, based on a rubric, rating all these different things that the kids had been to include, with the goal, which we'll show you in a minute, was to make a recommendation as to the preferred type of energy they thought Concord could use. I offered an opportunity to go a step further than that, and told the teacher I would share it with the building committee, and they could really weigh in on what that energy source might be. And I'll tell you, I caught the kids' attention with that opportunity. So these are some of their projects. I think the video works, Carlin.
Oh yeah, ready for it?
Yeah, we're ready for it. So these were actually projects that were manipulated and movable. And so you can imagine kids are walking around learning and just completely taken with all that they're seeing and valuing, with a teacher who's really structured this, so they've got to be recording and really coming away with high-level takeaways of what each component of energy includes. They then had to do some writing, so I hope you're going to hear the cross-curricular components that we would be envisioning. In a bigger space with a team approach at another level, the English teacher might have taken this on. She did it in a smaller way to just allow the kids to have to put their opinions to writing. So they each had to pick a recommendation and support that. So it's opinion types of persuasive essays. And then here's the math. So they all got to vote on 1st through 5th choices. FYI, solar and hydro with their primary modes. I think, the part she could have done, and I think we could do in another setting, you could take it to another level and really do the geography and the social studies component of which of those is actually the better fit to Concord at another level from what they just did. So I think you can see this is the type of thing we want to do all the time, is to really give kids authentic opportunities, active, hands-on, engaged, in another space. Carla, if you don't mind going back to that first slide where we show her classroom. In another space, that one.
Okay.
I take this and I envision what she could have done if she'd had the Situate Gates School to work with, and spreading that all out in the neighborhood space outside of her classroom, opening the walls up, bringing other classrooms in, which in this environment she just physically couldn't do. I mean, this was really tight with the kids walking around. I don't have a picture of the kids and I trying to walk through it, but really challenging. And I think the space could just uplift this to a whole nother level of what the possibilities are. I'm going to take a breath there because I think I'll run out of time on it. I think 1 minute, see, that's pretty good. And I know you gave me 24 instead of 20, so that's pretty good. So I hope that gives you like the high level view of both what our vision would be and what the school would do to support that. We're limited in that right now for sure, especially at Sanborn with the structure of that very extended building. It literally takes 5 minutes to walk from one side to the mods. And believe it or not, we call the mods the best space in the school, which I just had to say out loud after your first comment. So we have a lot of hopes and aspirations. We won't give those up if the building somehow doesn't come to be, but the space and environment would certainly bring that to a whole new level and give our kids a whole new middle school experience. So, thank you.
Thank you. Kate Handley and Ruth will take the next stage, which is sustainability in our school buildings. Matt is the senior project manager at Integrated Eco Strategy, LLC, and he's joined by Kate, who is Concord's Director of Sustainability, to discuss sustainability in Concord schools. Over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt. Thank you to Dr. Hunter. That was awesome. That was
Thanks.
really great to hear.
I'll tell you,
about-
let me talk education.
I know. We haven't heard her talk that way on the building committee yet, and that was really wonderful. And certainly thank you to Ruth and Dory wherever you are. For hosting us and having us in, and I think Carlin also deserves a big thank you for her consistency in showing up to the building committee meetings and representing the League of Women Voters. I guess I have, look at the title here. I have specifically not used the word sustainability in that title, and that is very much on purpose because. From my perspective, sustainability when we're talking about buildings can be very narrow. And what I really want to communicate to you in the time that we have here is that we're really talking about, the word that I use in my profession is high performance. And so we're talking about high performance buildings. And that is very much broader than sustainability. It's looking at indoor air quality, it's looking at thermal control, how comfortable you feel in the space, acoustic control, all of the items that Dr. Hunter mentioned. Hydro, I don't think is going to make it into the building. It's wonderful that the students are thinking in that way. There's not a lot of resource for that opportunity on site, but certainly solar.
That's why I brought up the geography and all
Right,
that.
but it's just wonderful that they're thinking, that they have the opportunity to free think like that, and I think that really is the point, and we want to foster that educational opportunity. It is a much more kind of holistic and broader view in terms of the building. I mean, I don't know how many people have been in the Sanborn Library on a cold winter night when the heat sets back, right? It gets cold in there fast. And I'm working on a project, we just received the report from the engineer, where if worst case, the building lost power, it's the middle of winter, it's between 10 and 20 degrees outside, the temperature in the building would not drop below 55 degrees for 4 days. So this is a radically different building than, many of us grew up in these old New England homes where you lose power and within hours you're worried about pipes freezing. And these are buildings where you can stay in place. We haven't gotten to the shelter in place and whether this is a refuge site or not. But these are places where the community could go to and shelter in place for days. And Russ from facilities doesn't have to suddenly worry about and run to the building when the power goes out because he's worried about pipes freezing. These are radically different buildings than kind of what we're used to and what we're experiencing. And that ripples on down in terms of acoustic control, indoor air quality, ventilation, building durability, moisture control. There's a whole knock-on effect that comes with this focus on the performance of the building and thinking beyond just energy efficiency. So Carlin, if you went, this is the King Open School. This is a high-performing building in Cambridge. Recently completed, it just opened this fall. It had a rather ambitious target. One of the challenges that we have found in terms of finding examples for the committee to look at is that most of the schools in Massachusetts are funded by the MSBA, and the MSBA is not the most progressive agency in the state. So there are not a lot of great examples of really high-performing schools. I have one other building, a public building that I'll show you towards the end. But we do kind of need to look towards other building types. And from my perspective, that is not scary. I mean, a building is a building. Certainly the programming that goes into it, you need specialized expertise to design, like what Dr. Hunter is talking about. But a wall assembly is a wall assembly, whether it's in a multifamily building or a school building. And we still need to control thermal flow and moisture and all of the other issues, regardless, weather outside, solar gains, all of those issues apply regardless of the building type. So this is a beautiful school. I actually haven't been to this school. I haven't had the opportunity. Kate toured it at the end of the summer. It's only recently opened, so there's not a lot of building performance. I mean, one thing about energy efficiency is there is a metric at the end. We know how the cake turns out at the end because we can find out how it performs, and those are metrics that certainly will get measured and tracked here. I think the next slide so Kate and I are kind of partnering here.
gonna
Hopefully
tag
you know Kate as the sustainability coordinator for Concord.
Yeah, so thanks, Matt. And I did tour that King Open School right before it opened. They were putting finishing touches on it as they were touring us around. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful school. And I think seeing with all the tours that we've gone on, it's just really exciting to envision a middle school environment where there's walls are moving and you're collaborating and the kids are working on project teams. That's not something I experienced in middle school. So it's really fun to see it in action. But I want to talk a little bit about Concord and sustainability. As many of you know, Concord has long been committed to being a leader in sustainability and formalized that commitment in 2017 at town meeting with the commitment to reducing our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050, which also created my position, so thank you. 2050 might feel like a long way away, but in 2050, this middle school will be about 27 years old. And we're building schools for at least 50 years, so it will barely be halfway through its life when we get to 2050. So the decisions that we make today with this building and all of the decisions we make in town really does impact that goal. And buildings are a really huge opportunity for us to take the leadership and help us on the track to meeting that goal, because buildings make up 60% of our emissions in town. The good news is that it's not as daunting as it seems, because as Matt said, there are a lot of examples of really high performing schools. As far as commitment to sustainability, a lot of other communities have started to make specific commitments to their buildings being net zero or emissions free. So we're not alone in this quest for a really high performance school. So if you go to the next slide, what does that mean, these big goals around emissions reductions? What does that actually mean in our school? And these are some of the specific goals that we're thinking about as a committee that will help deliver what the town has asked us for in our greenhouse gas reduction goal, and also at town meeting with the article that gave us the go-ahead to do this feasibility study, amended it to say we want this to be a priority for net zero design and all electric. So I'll just go down the list here. Healthy indoor air quality. Lori mentioned this in her conversation. We want this to be a really healthy school, right? No one who doesn't want good indoor air quality, and ventilation and indoor air quality is a big component of green building design. Inspire a passion for learning. I think Lori did a really great job of talking about this is an opportunity to connect to nature and examples like the project with the energy design, like that the school can help facilitate that kind of learning to prepare these students for the future careers. My job didn't exist when I was in middle school, and I would have loved to do something like that. So I think that's a really key component of it. Of course, super energy efficient. The town meeting article, the amendment that said we should do this net zero design. What does that mean? That means first making a really, really energy efficient building, a building that does not use a lot of energy. And so that's a really key component, and that means, making it really well insulated, being thoughtful about where and how many windows, how things are constructed, and Matt has a lot of knowledge on this, so he brings that to the committee. Lower embodied carbon, what that means is that there is carbon emissions that go into all the products that go into our building. And while that doesn't directly affect the emissions and the energy we use on site, it has an impact elsewhere. So seeking to try to reduce that in being thoughtful about the materials that we choose. All electric. How does all electric make us more sustainable? Well, electricity is the only fuel that can be 100% renewable. We can't make natural gas or oil renewable. So by choosing electricity as our fuel source, we're setting ourselves up for an emissions-free building. Right now, Concord's electricity is more than half carbon-free. It'll be 100% by 2030. So this is just setting us up for that future. And solar ready, obviously this was the first choice of the students, so that gives us a lot of direction there. What that means is just that, unfortunately,
You may have to come tell them.
Concord's not really windy enough for the wind, so I did like the video with the wind turbine. Solar ready means that our building is ready for solar so that we can plug the solar panels in when we get them, that it has the right electrical systems and is set up for that. So I'll just say that, these may seem very focused on energy, and that's, because a lot of the decisions and vision that we need to decide and set targets for our designers now to get what we want relate to energy. But as Matt and Dr. Hunter said, there's so much more when it comes to sustainability and high performance, the connection to outdoors, the inspiring learning related to sustainability, natural lighting, waste reduction, water, all of those things are commitments that the committee has made and is in our project charter, which is our guidepost for a successful building. So I'm going to hand it back over to Matt to take us through how do we actually get this done.
Thank you, Kate. So maybe one question you're having right now is how much is this going to cost? And I don't have any cost information. We don't have cost information on any of the project yet, right? We have some general guidelines for what we think the project will cost, but we don't have any kind of forecast projections from the design team on any items of the project yet, and those probably won't start to come in until early March. So we don't want to talk real costs until late March.
Late March.
Thank you, Mike.
I'll be talking about that.
Yeah, okay, great. So we can't talk costs yet, but what we can talk about is process and how we make decisions about the costs. And I guess, one thing that Kate mentioned is we're really working hard to embed sustainability, high performance early on in the process. So that it is not intended to be this kind of additional item that gets glommed on to the end. It's really integrated through the process to minimize the cost and effort. But whatever decision gets made about cost, it doesn't all get spent on day one. These are the phases of a project. We've got 3 phases of design here: schematic, design, development, and construction costs, and then construction documents, production, and then there's pre-construction, construction, and completion. And so whatever that number is, X amount that gets kind of associated with sustainability, doesn't all get spent on day one. There'll be costs that are associated with early energy modeling and consulting fees on the design team. Then there's iteration, there's detailing of air barrier and insulation that gets done through the design process and final construction documents. And then so there will be costs associated with that effort. But at each one of these points, there's kind of an off-ramp opportunity where if we get construction costs that are higher than we're willing to tolerate for going for triple pane high performance windows, then at that point when we get that pricing, let's say it's after construction documents, and in pre-construction we can make the decision as a committee to not commit to that. So there are all of these points at which these decisions about sustainability will be met. I guess I'm getting some head shaking in the front here. What I will say right now is that one thing that the sustainability subcommittee has been working really hard on is setting clear and ambitious guidelines up front. Because what we know is that if you don't have high targets to start with, those don't come through the project, right? If you aim low, you're gonna get low quality. So we are aiming high to start with. Will we get there? I don't know. We'll see how this process all unfolds. But I think that we know that we at least need to aim high to start with, and then we need to be realistic about all of the demands and needs about this project. And so that'll be the process that we work through. I think we've got one more slide, Carla. I don't know how we're doing on time.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. So this is the Division and Fish and Wildlife Building. This is located in Westboro, just down 495. Completed a couple of years ago. This is a net zero energy building, publicly built project. It definitely had some bumps in the road getting in the first couple of years of operation of this building, but they have figured that out, and now it is operating at net zero energy. I say that because I want to highlight that there are other past projects that have done a lot of kind of early work to flesh out the problems, and so there have been a lot of lessons learned within our industry, and we know how to build these buildings. We know how to build buildings of this scale that we're talking about for the middle school, and at performance levels that are, net zero energy. I mean, if you look at this, this is a beautiful roof, right? Like this is the kid's solar dream here in terms of there's no mechanical systems up there, there's no plumbing penetrations. It's oriented towards the southern exposure. That's a beautiful solar roof. Is our project going to have PV? I know there are a lot of people who feel very strongly that it does. I certainly hope that it does. I know that at the very least we can tell the design team from right now that we want this type of kind of exposure so that we're PV ready is the term. We had a meeting with in my last 30 seconds here, I'll just ramble on. I mean, we had a meeting with the sustainability subcommittee the other day, so SMMA, so LEED, we didn't want to throw up the alphabet soup in terms of certifications that we're looking at, but certainly the subcommittee is looking at a green certification program. LEED is the most prevalent one out there and probably the one that most people have heard. You should know that is LEED Silver is kind of the standard that has been baked into the process, so we know at the very least that the design team is going for LEED Silver certifiable. And the questions that the sustainability subcommittee right now is working on is, do we go above that? How do we go for it? What are those targets? So, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll get to questions.
Thank you.
Remember your 3x5 cards, everybody. Thank you. I appreciate it. Next up, we have Mike Carroll. He is the owner's project manager of the middle school project. He's an alum of Stonehill College and Notre Dame. He's worked for several construction companies. He joined his current company, Hill International, in 2010. In addition to his engineering degrees, he is certified by the state as a construction supervisor and is MCPPO certified. The topic today is building cleaner, safer, healthier schools. And I will say, having worked on some building committees in the past, his job is often leading or dragging the community and the committee. So I welcome your words, Mike.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I appreciate it. I think at the very beginning of the discussion today, Ruth kind of started off talking about kind of the history here and the schedule prior to Hill coming on, where there was a vision in the early 2000s, and you started with some of the other school projects and the other school buildings, and this is kind of the last one that we're working towards right now. So I'm not going to talk about that, but what I am going to talk about, if we can flip to the first slide here, is This schedule here is hard to read, and my understanding is we're gonna be making it available for everybody to see on the website. But this schedule, bar graph wise, starts in August of this year, which is when Hill was brought on, and it shows how we're gonna get from that point forward to getting the students into the building in the fall of 2023, and then ultimately closing the project out fall of 23, winter, or spring of 24, depending on the exact construction sequencing. So, before I get too much into the schedule, kind of taking it at a high level, Matt touched based on one of his slides that there's several components into building a project. So once you brought the OPM on board, once you brought the designers on board, we're subject matter experts. We're here to inform the committee, inform the district, and inform the community so that you can make the proper decisions for your building. We're not here to make any decisions for you. We're here, just like we are today, to inform you so that you can make the proper decisions, what best suits your needs. To do that, you don't just jump right in and get the solution. You have little bites, little pieces. So the feasibility design is what we're in right now. That's the first part. That has a couple of components. We're validating the initial feasibility study done by Feingold. We're validating that the new building option is the preferred option, is the best option. And then if it is in fact the new option, which I believe it will be, which new option is the right one? Is it on the left side of the site or the right side of the site? Is it on the north side of the site or the south side of the site? Is it a building with a courtyard? Is it a building that's longer and expansive? So there's a lot of discussions that will go in, and the educational program is going to be driving a lot of that, as well as other items such as sustainability with the placement of the building on the site and how it orients to the natural light and things of that nature. So that's what we're doing in that first feasibility study. After feasibility comes schematic design. I'll say from a personal experience, you decide you want to do an addition to your house. You start on a napkin, right? And you start that's the feasibility. Now the napkin kind of gets to the next level, and we're trying to figure out what are we doing. Maybe you start to engage a design professional. Maybe you have a friend that's a design professional. You start talking to them, and now you've got a little bit better plan. That's the schematic design. So now we figure that the addition's going to go on the left side of the house, not the right side of the house. And now we can move forward. After that, you get into design to development. So we've got a general idea of what we want. Now we have to start filling that box and understanding all those different components, all the parts and pieces in the design development. And at the end of each of these stages, we are able to validate where we're moving forward with an estimate. And that was one of the things Matt talked about. We don't have estimates right now, but you're going to be able to validate at the end of feasibility, where do we stand? And then at the end of schematic design, are we still on target? And then at the end of design development, are we still on target? And then we go to 60% construction documents, and then 90, and then 100. So there's steps along the way that we're making sure that we're giving you the right building for the right price is an important part of that. So with that, if we can flip to the next slide, like I said, I know you can't see a lot of the detail here, and just to understand, if I expanded this schedule right now, it wouldn't be one page, it would be about 4 pages. When I get the contractor on board, the construction part alone, which is basically this one blue bar right here, will probably be 50 or 60 pages. So, just kind of give you a sense of it. But some of the key dates we have right now that are going to tie into some of the key decisions for the town to make is the first date up there, 3/26. That's when the feasibility portion of the design will be done. So at that point, we'll have gotten our basic idea, our back of the napkin idea done. We'll have an estimating team validate that, and we'll be able to bring that to the building committee and allow them to understand what we're doing. Part of that is we might do a lot of options. We might say, here's our base building. We're going to do it without solar panels. Well, what's the add if we do add solar panels? Things like that. So we'll be able to not only evaluate the building as a whole, but evaluate individual parts and pieces so we can understand how much this size gym costs, how much a bigger size gym costs, things of that nature. So that's in March. In August of this year, we'll have gotten to the end of the schematic design portion. And at that point, again, we've got another number and a more complete set of documents. That is the number that we will be putting out to the public. That's the number that we will be going to a potential vote on with town meeting and with ultimately a debt exclusion. So that's a key date. And I'll show you in a minute here, we're gonna blow up this section here, which is the town actions, the town activities. But the other key dates that we have here, the October 27th, if we can keep on schedule and the design is complete, that's when we feel we would have a contractor on board and they can start construction. So they'd actually be physically out there on the site, in the ground, getting going. That date is kind of key right now because typically a general contractor will get into the ground in October. They'll start digging and doing the concrete foundations, things of that nature. That's the first thing they have to do. You can do that in November, in October and in November and December. If you're starting in December or January, they typically don't do that because there's a lot of extra costs there associated with winter conditions, heating, and things of that nature. So if we lose 1 or 2 months here, it could potentially cost us 6 months at the beginning of the project. So that's a key component.
It's October 21.
21.
Sorry, did I say?
No,
You didn't say that.
I didn't say October 21. Yes, yes, no, so this is a year. So what we're looking at is big picture, a vote this fall, the design finishes, and then it allows you to start construction next fall. So having an October start date allows us about an 18-month duration on the construction, which gives us a May completion. Now, when we say completion in the construction world, it's substantial completion. There's 2 different versions of completion. It's substantial and final. So substantial completion means you could start using the building that day. It doesn't mean that the dings on the wall, the paint dings, that maybe a light bulb might be missing, little things like that, the touch-up that you have to do at the end of a project is done. The key with that May date is maybe threefold. One, it allows us from that May date till the August date, which is when the students are actually in the building, to go from substantial to final, so that we're not bringing in people after hours on weekends and stuff like that when kids are in the building. The ideal would be to get that done prior to getting anybody in the building. The second part of that is that a May end date gives us flexibility and reduce the risk profile for the town, because if we were to come up against something that caused a delay, we can absorb a good amount of time here, maybe as much as 2 or 3 months, before we start impacting or having to discuss about school openings, things of that nature. The other thing it does do is it allows us to take that time from May to August to move the 2 existing buildings and the 2 existing staff into the new building, let them get familiar with it, let them get up to speed. And I said 3, but one more item is on the contract bid date. Most schools in the state of Massachusetts finish in July and August. It's natural, you finish it right before the school opens. So in that vein, and in July and August, all the companies that do lockers and tile and paint and landscaping and all those things, all those finishes, all those things you see in the finished product, they're all really, really busy. So if you can give them a schedule that is off that typical, we feel that there's a potential bid savings on bid day. So those are kind of some of the high level factors. So if we can flip to the next slide here, I'm gonna zoom in on this box here. That box, if we go to one more slide, this is the town action. So this is what we're looking to have a discussion on. And I will say, the first couple slides you saw the big draft across it. This is a draft option. We've discussed 3 main options right now. This is the middle option. We're gonna get to the options at the end, but this is the middle option. So rather than focusing so much on the dates, let's focus on the differences of the time periods between the dates if we can. So what we're looking at here, schematic design, the last date there, I know it's a little hard to read up here, is August 18th of 2020. That's when we're gonna have the design package done and the estimates done. What we're looking to do is open a warrant slightly before that, so we're gonna have the documents mostly complete. We'll be in the process of doing the numbers on it, but we're opening a warrant for the language that would have to go into this, and we'd be closing it basically about a week before that estimate would be due, and that would allow us to schedule a potential for a town meeting about a month after that, which we're targeting the middle of September right now in this option, which would be September 16th. So looking at when the estimate is available, it's gonna be available on the 18th. We're gonna go to the committee with that, 2 days after that, 3 days after that, get the committee approval. And then basically about a month before we would go to town meeting, you'd have a full set of documents, including the costs for that documents, to be able to reviewed by the entire public. From the town meeting, the next 2 items are the dates that the technical language on the ballot would have to be finalized. Line 46 here, this one here, is if we would go for a presidential election, we actually have to finalize that information a little bit earlier because it has to go to the state. Line 47, if we were to do it, it has to be 35 calendar days prior to the election, so that's what we're showing there. Assuming that we were successful at town meeting, we would look to do a ballot question 2 weeks later so that it's fresh in everybody's mind, and that would be September 30th. And that would then allow you to extend my contract and extend the designer's contract to finish the contract work. And the last line there I had there is just to identify the presidential election, because that's gonna be one of the other options that we have here. So that's just kind of a high level. What we're trying to do is understand what the town items are specific to the warrant, town meeting, and the vote. All right, so if we can go to the last slide here. So this one here, again, is a little hard to read, but what we have here is we have 3 dates that we considered for the vote. And everything kind of backs into the other activities based on that vote. So the first date we had was doing a vote at the beginning of September. We put September 1st there for a discussion. And then the second option we had was running it in parallel with the presidential election and having it on November 3rd. So those were our 2 initial thoughts. As we had discussions and thinking through, we thought of a third option, which is the middle option here, which was a vote on September 30th. And what we tried to do here is outline the pros and cons for each. You'll note we said not preferred on the first option. We felt, or the committee felt pretty strongly that having a vote on September 1st means your town meeting is in August. It just wasn't proper for the town. Having the meeting in the summertime, having the vote just as the kids are getting back into school, it might even be before Labor Day. In that scenario, just wasn't really the option. So we kind of crossed that off the list, but we just wanted to leave it up there so you understood that it was discussed. It was part of the.
That is a primary day, so the federal election is complicating things. So just so you know, that's why we considered it, because it is a primary date. There'd already be balloting.
So the September 30th and then the November 3rd are the 2 that we're really focused in here on. And what we did here is running down the pros and the cons for each. On September 30th, in general, if we didn't take the town's needs into consideration, if I just said designer, what would you like to do for your schedule? This one fits with that. So, we always have to take into other factors in, but the designer said basically that one fits properly. I'm gonna have my schematic design done on the 18th regardless, and everything will just flow easily from that. The schedule aligns with the construction. We talked about trying to get the construction in the ground, before the winter hits, and again, it aligns with that. The schedule aligns with the spring of 23 turnover, which allows us to open in the fall of 23, gives us some flexibility there. Flexibility is a word you'll hear a lot around here. It avoids, another item we had here is that it avoids having the election on the same date as the president. So there's been a lot of discussion about this one. People say, we wanted to focus on the school only, we want to have a vote just for the school, that's what we want, that's a pro. And then others say, no, we want to have it with the presidential election because that's when everybody's going to be out, and that's a pro. So you'll have to decide for yourself, is that a pro or a con? But we listed it here as a pro, and I think on this one, we've listed having it with the presidential election as a pro. So we're saying it's a pro on both of them, basically. The next one, maintaining the design momentum. So one of the keys here is the designers ideally are not going to stop on August 18th and wait for the vote and wait for the election to happen and then get a contract. We want the designer to be able to continue through, because it's very hard for them to have a whole team of people working on the project and say, all right, take 2 months off or 3 months off, and then we want you to come back. So there's always momentum lost there, and it affects your schedule overall. And then the other item here is, right now with the appropriation the town has made, we feel we could actually extend the designer into that next phase for about a month within the current budget, and again, keep that momentum moving forward. So that's what the bullet 7 here is. The cons to this is there is an additional expense, because either way, you're gonna have a special town meeting. And when I say town meeting, I should make sure that everybody, that's a special town meeting, it's an extra one. But in this option here, you're gonna have an extra vote as well. So we feel that the money set aside for the project could cover that vote cost, because we feel that that's part of it. It's a project-related expense, so why it shouldn't be covered by the project-related cost. It is an additional trip to the poll. So you're asking people to come out again, you have a primary, and then you have the election, and we're looking to do something in the middle. And, you know, potential with having that extra polling option is that you have a lower voter turnout. And then the final thing here is, if we were not to allow the designer to keep moving forward, you have a break there.
Can I just interrupt for a minute? So that is the recommendation of the building committee as of yesterday morning. We've had extensive discussion of this timing piece. It is a select board decision, however. So the recommendation for the September timeframe is what's gonna be presented to the select board to consider. Mike will go through the pros and cons to the November timeframe in a minute. I just wanna be sure you understand the context of, after a lot of months of deliberation, that's what the building committee voted yesterday to push forward to the select board.
Yes. So the pros and cons on the November 3rd, obviously we avoid the additional cost of a town vote, an additional town vote. We avoid an additional trip to the ballot. The best possible target for having the largest voter turnout, because people aren't just coming out for the school, they're also coming out potentially for the presidential election. And we do believe there's a potential for maintaining the design momentum, but that would only be if we did an additional appropriation and got additional funds in there. So there's a pro there, but there's a little caveat to it. The cons on it is if we don't get that additional appropriation, that we are gonna have to stop the design prior to that November 3rd election, and we're gonna have a delay there. We're gonna have some downtime there. It takes away focus from the project, so people aren't necessarily going to vote for our school project. They're going to vote for the president, and oh yeah, the school project's there. So, you know, so that's one thought there. The additional risk for the design development, it's about 2.5 months, and that 2.5 months is the August 18th date until the November 3rd date. So that's where we're coming with the 2.5 months. The adjustment to the construction schedule, we still feel that we can do a fall of 23 opening even with that. But what ends up happening is that punch list, the paint touch-up and stuff that I talked about, probably happens the first couple months of school. You're gonna be moving teachers in while we're finishing up the construction over that summer. It just crowds it up a little bit more, and it adds a little bit to the risk profile for the town, because you don't have that ability to have a cushion to address unforeseen conditions, basically. And then the final, that is the final, it's increasing the town risk profile. So I think with that, I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I'll be happy to.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Okay, and then we have had 3 very informative and strong presentations. We is very grateful for you each to turn up, do your homework, and help us with it. And now it's our turn. We will get our 3x5 cards ready, and if you will, direct your questions to me. We'll stay nice and well behaved. Keep your questions, come on in if you're coming. Keep your questions succinct, so we're not wandering all around Robin Hood's barn. Say a minute for a question, that should give you enough to, you know, insert adjectives and adverbs. And then we will direct the question to our panel. Now, if there's follow-up questions from that question, please refer them to me as well, and you'll stand, you'll give your name and address, just we're pretending to be town meeting here, and ask your question, and our panel will respond, okay? Everybody understand the game plan? Okay, so, here we are. Susie Brunner, thank you very much. I think your work is done.
Thank you.
So, questions please, raise hands. Yes, ma'am. Would you rise and identify yourself?
I shall. Julie Rowine, 1404 Main Street.
It works.
And my question is about the educational vision for middle school education. And I was wondering how things that are not part of the 4 pods fit into this. So I think of resources like libraries or music and physical education and those sorts of things. Art, sorry, art.
Music.
Music, well, I said music, drama, yes, yes, that's
Now,
my
do we
question.
have a desired person to answer, or does
I was
everybody
talking
want
to
You might want me to answer that.
Yeah, of course, our superintendent, so she can talk more about education.
Yeah.
So if anybody else wants to buy a part of that, that's okay, but
Nope.
Dr. Hunter, would you
Sure,
respond, please?
gladly. So the way we configure middle schools in a real true middle school model is the pods that I mentioned, but then, and we call those 4 on team. It's a little bit of the jargon that we use. On team is those 4 components. And then off team are the lists of things you just mentioned. So the kids tend to travel more together within those 4, but then they branch out for the rest of the day to those other components. So in terms of the space and the proximity and all of that, those tend to be more in the common areas because all the grade levels are going to access art, music, PE, so they tend to be more centrally located so that they leave the team area to go to those environments, which actually is a nice balance to helping them feel like they're part of a bigger entire middle school while getting the benefit of that smaller team.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Another question. Yes, ma'am.
Edie Lipinski, 133 Nurse Neck Hill. To follow up with Dr. Hunter, I know you've done a lot of gathering input from all the teachers and staff and everyone in the school, but I wonder how will the new design foster interdisciplinary collaboration among the teachers, and what are the challenges that the new design might pose? I just also want to suggest that an authentic mathematics project for the students would be cost analysis of different systems.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Really, the team model lends itself immediately to interdisciplinary approaches. Because those teachers are considered a team, they actually also have planning time together, which is a key component of how that translates into actual instruction being connected across curricular areas. In a new school, we get gifts of new choices about whether we group kids together. For example, that wall in Situate, they open it up and the social studies and English teacher will combine classes and co-teach in a particular topic, where the theme in the English text or the novel will cross-reference into the social studies environment. I mean, history is such a great example of that. If you were to read, the Diary of Anne Frank, the social studies teacher can immediately start talking World War II with the kids, and you could do that in that kind of environment. So the combination of the flexible spaces and the team approach, our teachers already meet in this planning time together as a team. The trick is that as we expand it out to a school that's not set up for that, it is limited in its impact and implementation. What are the challenges in the new school? There's a lot fewer than there are right now. Time is always the challenge. So we embed the planning time, trying to make sure that we're building units that can fit within a school year and still hit some of the mandated curriculum areas. You've got to really embed projects that you're directly teaching the standards at the same time. So you really got to create highly valued, impactful activities for kids and options for kids that are really also hitting all those mandates that we must hit. So I think that becomes the challenge. Once you build it and get a rolling figure, and I think that's what we saw in Situate. They had already had the time to build. They were in year 5 of actually executing, and it was a pretty well-oiled machine. The build is the building of it's really the challenge.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, in the back corner.
Susan Fry, 449 Sudbury Road. I have a question. So right now, the 6th graders are in a contained space. Are you looking at all in terms of they develop, there's a model for middle school that's been where the social studies and English is one teacher and does a double session, and then the science and math is a double session, and it's a really nice, it addresses the child development needs of kids going from 5th grade where they have one teacher, and it's a time-tested good method of getting the kids prepared for more of the more complicated team models. Are you guys looking at that as a model at all?
So right now, and this is typical in other districts as well, we're actually looking at 5th grade as an opportunity for that transition. There's a pilot at Willard where teachers are collaborating so that they become a team of 2 for the kids to swap. And so one teacher teaches typically math and science, and the other teaches ELA and history. That is very normal in a upper intermediate elementary mode. So I think we're in the early discussions of what that could look like, which would then help to transition kids to a 4-teacher team in 6th grade, which we've really slowed down and helped them get used to that schedule and those changes in Peabody. And just, I have to say that what we love about Peabody, we would want to move to the new school. We don't love that it's a separate building from the rest of the, 7th and 8th grade, but we love what we're creating there in terms of transition. And for example, the Gates School, one piece that we were really drawn to, they've made a 6th grade wing, and it stays separate from the 7th and 8th until they go out to art and music and all that, but it really allowed for some of that. So that would be something we value in a design, is to maintain some of that process.
Thank you. Pam?
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green, Unit 4. Thank you for your presentations. It's been so inspiring. When talking costs of passive house and other environmental building designs, do you include talking about the savings over traditional building construction costs? For example, you don't have to have a furnace. A giant furnace is a major cost in most new buildings. When you do the cost comparison, and the huge savings the huge ongoing savings in operating costs. Please, are you going to include those things in your presentations for what kind of building we want to invest in? Because the costs of, I think, LEED silver is way too low. It's very expensive for very little payoff. For just a little bit more money, we can save incredible amounts of money. So can you make sure we only have one chance to do that? It has to be at this stage.
Okay, Pam, thank you. We got the question?
I got the question, yeah.
Okay, do your best.
You want me to take this one, Kate? All right, absolutely. I entirely agree with you, and certainly about the comment about LEED silver. I mean, I don't think any of us are expecting that to be the target. That I mentioned that so that everyone is aware that there's a baseline, and there has been a lot of talk about and focus on energy. There are other factors that LEED covers, like waste and water and other items. So that's why I mentioned that. But we are certainly considering much more ambitious targets. I mean, to your question about costs, absolutely. I mean, so the expectation is that we will spend a little bit more on the enclosure, the insulation, the air sealing, the windows. And when you do that, you look for areas in which you can offset those additional costs, and that comes in the form of mechanical systems. So when we have more insulation, when we have better air sealing, we need smaller mechanical systems. We can downsize the ductwork. We don't need to run the ductwork all the way out to the windows. We can deliver it at an interior space rather than an exterior wall because the thermal comfort is already there. So absolutely, we will not just be looking at simple payback in terms of how much are we spending and what are the cost savings of the utility. We'll be looking at full life cycle cost analysis, all of the enclosure, the mechanical systems, all of that, and then what's the maintenance on those, what's the replacement of those in the future. So and the other values in terms of better indoor air quality, having a shelter in place, having a quieter school. You know, we don't have to hear the fire engine going by and then distracting us when there are airplanes flying overhead. Those are distractions to the kids. Those external. And when you have well air sealed, good windows, you don't hear those outside noises.
Thank you. Mike has a follow-up?
I think just to reiterate, when we have the estimators pricing these works at the ends of each step, when you say cost, there's kind of three major components to that. It's the construction costs, it's the operating costs, and the life cycle analysis. And that is something that we've talked extensively about with the building committee. It's something that we actually talk with the designers during the designer selection to make sure that we got the right designer on board, and a designer that is understanding that we're not doing construction only. Matt had mentioned a lot of projects we do are with the MSBA. MSBA typically is focused on the construction part of it and not necessarily the other parts. So we understand that that's a very important part of making a proper decision.
Are you going to?
No. Sorry, we have some other people waiting. In the back row, please, Diane.
Hi, Diane Proctor, 57 Sudbury Road. Thank you all, just amazing. At the FinCom last evening, FinCom meeting of the town, there was some discussion about the fact that the school committee on Tuesday evening, 2 nights ago, agreed to reapply for an MSBA grant. If a kind of cynicism to some degree set in, because if we had a vote earlier to in fact go forward as a town, would that be clearly undermining MSBA's consideration of such a grant? To make that, so that there's a kind of complexity there, and I wonder if it could be addressed, because I think there's some sentiment abroad, and it would be nice to have that cleared.
Sure. So we find ourselves in a very interesting, challenging spot with the timeline of how MSBA processes its statements of interest, which is the name of the document we put in when we request perhaps being subsidized. So just historically, to remind you, we've done that twice and asked for subsidies for the middle school and been denied twice. So MSBA receives somewhere between 70 and 80 requests per year. They have a certain amount of money that they can allocate, and it typically is funding between 12 and 15 schools out of those 70 to 80. We are not getting feedback from them that gives us grand hopes that that would change, which is why we went forward the way we did to request the 1.5 million for the feasibility and schematic design. In fact, as you do the cost work and look at the cost of waiting, even waiting to apply again and waiting to hear back because of the construction costs that continue to escalate just exponentially, we actually, in the committee, felt strongly, and I think the community agreed with it, and given the outcome of the vote, that it costs to wait, and given our demographic, our subsidy from MSBA is on the lower side of what they offer for percentages, and at some point you hit a tipping point. What the school committee and I spoke about Tuesday night was this challenging conundrum we find ourselves in, which that the next round of MSBA funding, the deadline is April 10th. So for us to not put in, to me, felt presumptuous that we would assume we were gonna get a positive funding outcome at town meeting, to not have put in. The negative side of that is to say, well, is it a backup plan if for some reason that were not to pass? That was the debate we had Tuesday night. We didn't really like either answer, to probably guess what the finance committee was talking about. Both of those aren't perfect. So the school committee supported my recommendation, was to put it in, know that it was there. Again, my communications with MSBA have not been highly encouraging. I would not be recommending, we wouldn't have gone forward to ask for the 1.5 if we had a lot of encouragement from them that it was gonna happen in year 3 or 4. That is not what we were getting for feedback, because we're competing with schools that are 100 years old, we're competing with urban districts that don't have financial means. All of that needs to be part of it. They're gonna say they compared facility to facility to facility and they don't consider the rest, but am I sure of that? I think we would debate, they've supported 3 projects here. At what point are they gonna prioritize other folks that don't have the same means and have far needier schools, believe it or not, far needier schools, and all you have to do is go to Boston and see their immense number of buildings that are underperforming. So we had this is the conversation we had. We decided to put it forward. It has to go to the select board. They get to actually make the decision to put it forward or not. There's no perfect answer. We understood the mixed messages, but I think felt that those mixed messages could be there no matter which way it went, and decided to err on the side of extreme caution to forward the SOI and know that it was in there just in case town meeting isn't supportive of perhaps the timing or cost or whatever unforeseen negative we're desperately trying to avoid.
Could
Thanks,
I
Diane.
interrupt the process here to ask a question that's come out of this? I'm sorry, I'm jumping the queue. What, and I don't know if it's a Dr. Hunter or a sustainable question, what outcome can we expect vis-a-vis our sustainability goals if, as whatever, MSBA does look kindly on us? Does it pay us?
I'm actually
to
gonna let
wait?
Mike answer
So
that.
I'll answer that. So what happens with the MSBA, they have a formula for reimbursement. And that formula is based on basically the demographic of the town, and I think Lori mentioned earlier that in Concord it's quite low. That formula is a number, and I think we're in the 30 range, less than 30 range. So what that means is 30 cents, I'll say 25 then. If it's 25 cents of every dollar spent on the project, the MSBA could potentially reimburse you. And I say potentially because it's not just 25%, it's 25% of the eligible costs. And eligible costs is a very key item because there's several things that are ineligible. Designer fees have a cap, OPM fees have a cap, site work fees have a cap, and then overall project costs have a cap. So to put it in perspective, right now, at least in the last 3 months, maybe 3 months ago, I'll say, the MSBA cap on construction is $311 per square foot. So if your building costs more than $300.11, which it will, because the average new building right now is running over $500 a square foot, they will give you 25% of the first $311 a square foot. Anything over that is town money. So you can, it's not gonna limit your sustainability, but what it is it's gonna limit the MSBA participation in paying for that additional sustainability.
And is there a mechanism that the town has to identify to add money to the mix?
So basically, the way that works is you would do a feasibility study. The process we're going right now, you would start that over. You would do that, and then you would have to go to a town vote to show that if the project value is X, the town portion is Y, but the town has the ability to pay for that Y. If you do that, then they'll put in their piece. But what happens there again is that with that eligibility, that cost, that 25% of the eligible, I'll give you 2 examples right now. I have one district that has a 58% reimbursement. It's actually translating to, it's 50% of eligible. It's translating to, from 58 of eligible is actually 50% of actual. That project started 4 years ago. I have another project that's starting right now. It's gonna be starting construction in this year. It's got a 52% reimbursement rate of eligible, but because that dollar value hasn't kept up with inflation, that's translating to less than 40% of actual. So that eligible cost is getting a little bit smaller, as we move forward. So again, it's not gonna affect your decisions of what you could put in your building, but what it does is it means the MSBA portion is getting smaller and smaller.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt flow, people. Other questions? Yes, I saw some hands. Mr. Allen from the back, please.
I'm too shy to stand up.
We need to hear you, so emote.
David Allen, 316 Eastbridge Road. Would the moderator countenance an observation, which will probably lead to another piece? Yes? No? Focusing for a minute on using electricity 100%, which of course is the thing to do, no question about it. We heard that the town supply of electricity is about half, quote, sustainable, in other words, not from carbon fuels. Important to know for those who don't follow these things, that's because about half of that half is actually done by the ratepayers, and it's all of the town, paying money so that we buy what are called RECs, renewable energy credits, so that we can claim that that half of a half or a quarter of the energy supply is renewable. In fact, only about a quarter of our energy supply is, quote, renewable. The rest is gas-fired generators. That's not renewable. It's better than coal, but it's not renewable. And the point is that we need to understand this so that we can be encouraging as ratepayers, as citizens, that we move as aggressively as we can to more and more solar and to particularly wind, which has great advantages.
And your question?
Not a question, as I said, an observation, which is why I sought your forbearance in this matter. And if someone wants to build on that and get a question out of it, good.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Mary Burton, I live in Concord. I can't follow up on that question, but I have another question. I'd like to understand the difference between net zero and net zero ready. And also I'd like to understand the difference between how much of these energy efficient features are designed in that could be added later, or is it all just baked in when the building's open? So if you could help me understand that.
Do you want me to take the first part?
Go for it, Kate. Sounds
so
good.
What net zero energy means is that over the course of a year, your building generates as much energy as it uses. So it nets zero over a year, right? Because when we're talking about generating electricity on a building, we're most likely talking about solar panels. They're not on all the time. They're not on at the time you're using your electricity. So over the average of the year, you're using no more energy in your building than you're generating. The way that you do that is by having solar on site and using electricity. Net zero ready means that you may not have the solar on your building right at the time that you're opening your building. So it's prepared in the sense that your building is all electric, it has the right systems there on the building to put the solar, plug the solar into the building, and it's designed to use as little energy as possible so that there's space there for enough solar to balance out and get you to that zero. And I'll let Matt answer your second question.
Does that cover the first one?
Yeah.
Okay. So to the second question, in terms of how much gets baked in versus how much are kind of line items that you can tease out on a cost estimate spreadsheet. So the classic answer to any building science question is it depends. And it depends on what we're talking about. So if we are talking about windows, that is one line item. It kind of gets swapped in. Are we talking about a high efficiency window with triple plane and thermally broken and all of that? That you could separate out on an Excel spreadsheet and say there's an X $100,000 cost to the higher performing window compared to some base window. Items like the massing of the building, the orientation of the building, those are ones that you want to get set from the beginning, because if you start to change those, then you're really changing the whole design of the building. I mean, similarly, like even when we talk about assemblies, wall assemblies, I mean, there are multiple components within that assembly. And so you really want to drive the efficiencies across that whole design. I mean, to the point I was talking about earlier, if we spend more on the enclosure and make that high performance, then we can downsize the mechanical system. Well, then suddenly, if partway through design we value engineer out half of the insulation, well, then suddenly our enclosure isn't performing as well. So that means we have to go back and upsize our mechanical system. So there are all these kind of knock-on effects that occur. So there are some that can be specifically pulled out, but I think one of the points that the sustainability subcommittee is really trying to communicate is that many of these ideas are all interconnected, and so we want to kind of start from day one with striving for a higher performance, because that will allow us to achieve kind of the maximum cost efficiency, design efficiency, process efficiency, as well as energy efficiency.
Stefan?
Stefan Bader, River Street, Concord. Can't see everybody. So the school design, the educational needs, it's all great. The school fits in the context of an environment, in the context of the town. And as we've seen from the high school, transportation is a big issue. Parking is a big issue. If you could have a LEED platinum certified building with a long line of hybrid SUVs lined up,
Yep.
are we really ahead?
Right.
So
Yep.
my question is, on the certification, does that look at how other things feed in, or is it just looking at the building, and does it look at just the building, or does it include the construction, the demolition, the waste, the debris from whatever this building replaced?
Yep.
And second of all, to the layout and the design, what are the assumptions built in as to how the children get to the school?
Do you want to take that last part?
I got the last part.
Okay.
You got the front
Do you want
part.
Yeah, sure.
You want
You go for it.
All
Yeah.
right, somebody jump.
So as far as the overall design, I'm going to say queuing of buses, queuing of parents dropping off and picking up isn't necessarily related to sustainability per se. We might put a note out there that you don't run your engines while you queue, but it's really part of the overall design of the building. So as far as fields and parking lots and roadways, that's all integral parts of the design, and while we have to orient the building correctly as far as solar gain and facing the sun right, we also have to orient it so that we can get the kids in and out of the building in an efficient manner. So I think that's gonna be a lot of the design discussions, a lot of the talks that we've had with other districts that are a little further down the line, for example, is we wanna keep bus queuing and parent queuing separate.
Right.
Things like that, so.
However, there is a lot of discussion. Kate was actually over at the central office building yesterday because the Sustainability Committee district-wide, which has a large number of community representation in there on it, as well as administrative staff, teachers, and high school students. I stress the importance of having them in the room. One of the major goals for the districts as part of this year's sustainability work is to get a better idea of the transportation decisions people are making. We're in the mode at the moment of really trying to collect data because Kate and I talk all the time. Changing culture is a very different activity than just saying we're going to set sustainability goals and meet. The building stuff, I think, that seems far easier to me than the culture change discussions. So we're working, actually, a lot of the sustainable groups in town are at the table with us. Mothers Out Front offered to actually get hands-on with it and do some legwork with us. We've surveyed kids over the last month, the juniors and the seniors at the high school. Mothers Out Front is developing a parent survey that we're going to push out to all of pre-K-12 to better understand who's coming to school, how, and why. The why is really, really important because that will help to inform what options we're going to create for them. You know, one of our biggest frustrations is the late bus. We run 2 late buses and they're just underused, and we need to better understand why. Why are parents dropping and picking up kids in the amount that they are? The why of all those other things. So we're trying to get that better understood so that as we create options or incentives or whatever words you want to put on it, they're actually going to meet the need of what's actually happening. Some of it's convenience. We all totally appreciate and know that. I'm actually interested in dissecting what the other reasons are that we might be able to more quickly address, because convenience is about mindset and willingness to change your behavior for these particular goals. So we're doing a lot of work on that. We could have a whole nother session on the electric buses that we're building a bigger fleet of and how we're going to do that. That's a different discussion, but we're also actively engaged in increasing the number of electric buses. We currently have 1, which is one of the first in the state, and we were really the pilot and have been one of the lead districts of 3 to really say that model can work. We actually helped develop a working bus. The first year it didn't work, so that is not something you want to do en masse, right? So we're actively looking at how to acquire more of those because they cost 4 times what a diesel bus costs. So there's lots to talk on there. But so the transportation question is high on our list. It's a little tangential to the building per se, but certainly part of the goals of the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, so all the certifications that we are looking at do not touch that issue,
Right.
because they look at items that they can control. And as
Right.
Dr. Hunter
Yeah, there
said,
you go.
Human action is not something that they can control. So they will look at like infrastructure for charging of electric vehicles. They'll look at the product selection that's used in the paving materials. So does it percolate water into the ground, or what happens with that water runoff? So they'll look at items like that. But
They also look at the demo debris and the debris
Yes.
and generated.
Yep.
So about recycling that and about
Yes.
recycled content and stuff. So there is definitely a component to that, especially with the
Absolutely.
old building coming down. What can you reuse? How can you reuse it?
yeah, there are definitely guidelines. I will say that they are not very stringent. And part of that is because they don't want to, they're developing standards that apply to all building types, and so they don't want to be penalizing projects that are decommissioning a building. Because they've got to stand on par with, they're more looking at kind of what is the new construction aspect. So the demo and what happens to that building, I think, is an area where we could look at kind of some stronger metrics in terms of
Thank you.
waste diversion.
Marge, did you have a question?
A very minor question. In the picture that was shown of the King School, on one side of the building, it looked as if there were 4 levels of rather shelves coming outside of the building. What were they?
Those are solar panel shades. So they're little shades over the windows that helps prevent solar gain when it's really sunny, and they're also solar panels.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I didn't mention so there were 2 big pictures. I mean, those are both beautiful buildings, at least in my opinion. They are, and you know, the Fish and Wildlife building has a babbling brook going through the middle of the building. I mean, it's wonderful to be in there. And
I don't think we're gonna have that.
I want to emphasize that beauty is really critical to sustainability, because we as a community and we take care of buildings that we love, and beauty is part of what helps us love buildings. So beauty is an important part of sustainability.
And I think one of the other things that struck me when I toured this school, in addition to it being beautiful, is that the design is optimized for sustainability, obviously, but also a lot of that overlapped with kind of the security aspects of the building. They have this side that you can see here, there's a courtyard in the middle, and there's a whole other side. This side is the school, where the classrooms are, and the pods, and the neighborhoods. The other side has all of the aspects that would be also used by the community. So it had the gym, and the cafeteria, and the auditorium, and also a public library. But they were separated by this courtyard, so that they can really isolate the classroom side, which helps with, you know, turning your lights down and all that stuff when it's not being used. But also there's a security aspect to kind of separating those different elements of the school, which I thought was really interesting and cool. But yeah, those are little solar shades, which are.
They look so fragile. Do we have a follow-up here? I'm thinking of one or yes, ma'am.
It was sort of a follow-up when it started, but I think the conversation went a little bit different way. So,
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Name, address?
Yeah. Carol Yell, I'm actually 484 Cross Street in Carlisle.
Thank you.
I'm co-president of the CPAC, so I'm sure you knew that. Can you talk a little bit about, when we were talking about the site, that's where I'm going back to, the site itself, about how you're looking into accessibility for the site in terms of the property overall, ties into bus drop-offs, student access. I think what I want to understand is that we're looking at that every single person coming into that building can come through the front door. And when you get my idea, I think, by that.
Excellent question.
Thank you.
Can we share the answer?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, I can start.
Yep.
So, I mean, from a construction standpoint, we're going to make sure that everything is 100% ADA accessible. So whether it's coming in, going out, but it's also more than ADA. It's also addressing sound and light and things of that nature. So we're really trying to be all inclusive with that design, and our design team has specialists on that team that are experts just in that field. So they, you know, when we have a design team, just so everybody understands, Sims Maney McKee is our design lead, but within their own department, they have dozens of people that are experts in various things, and then they have sub-consultants that are additional. So they have a sustainability expert, but then they have an HVAC engineer who's designing the HVAC systems, who also has sustainability experts. So when we're getting into overall flow of the building and things of that nature, we have educational planning experts, and they're going to help with the educational plan, but then we have other people that are on that team that are really helping to develop the design overall. And I think, just like Kate said, something that's sustainable can relate to security. Something that's security can relate to education. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's trying to meld all those disciplines together into a cohesive building that works for everything.
And I'll just add that, you know, we want to build a school that's great for every child. And a lot of things you might do for a particular population or a particular need are going to be great for all kids. So we do want it to be a building that every child can access and enjoy and be part of the inner workings of the school and the school culture. And we're collaborating closely, Carol and I talk all the time, with CPAC and as also with the designers and other outside groups that can support those efforts. So Disability Commission was at our last forum with CPAC a week ago, and we'll just continue to have those discussions.
Thank you. I have another question if nobody else does. Yes, ma'am?
Julie Romine, 14 Main. I actually just have a quick follow-on to Carol's question, which is that our current middle school houses a case program. Is that the plan for the new school as well?
Well, so they don't right now, because when we reconfigured, we did not have space for them at Sanborn. So in lieu of that, we are housing Cases the Collaborative we all belong to, and they sponsor different special education programs from districts that belong. In lieu of that, we're actually housing Cases Summer Program at Thoreau, because we no longer have space for them within the middle school. We haven't talked on that per se. We've been focused on what our own programs would be for the moment. We've built a number of intensive programs at the middle school and across all age levels actually, to have more opportunities for students with different types of needs to stay within district instead of going out. So that part has been highly talked about in the design efforts to make sure that those spaces can accommodate the needs of those kids in the programs that we've started to create.
And this leads into my question, so I'm glad. And my question has to do with the vision. If we are able to implement the educational vision, are we assuming that that works into a size implication, that whether it's a footprint or just floor space, that is larger perhaps than one that isn't sustainable or doesn't have this
So you
vision?
must have been having ESP to all the discussions we've been having this week. You know, and I think we watched what happened at Gates, and they were an MSBA school, so their size constricted because the formula requires that. And what they ended up doing, which I'm not sure is what we would end up doing, and we're on the early side of this discussion, they ended up giving up their library because, yeah, right, that's what I thought, that's what I hoped you were gonna say. Because to do some of these pods and teams can add to the square footage a bit. So that is actually what we're deliberating and deciding right now, because we're trying to figure out how many teams we need and how much classroom space that is, and trying to put the work together, because that's ultimately how we get to the total square footage and eventually a cost. So you're right on the money. That is exactly where we are in the conversation of like how all this plays together as we get the vision defined and what it looks like then to turn into a design. So it's the very early part of the discussion, but that is some of what we're starting to talk about.
And I'll just jump in to say that, I mean, the educational programming is what's driving the decision. I mean, we're not gonna limit the building size for sustainability reasons. And so the education is gonna dictate how that building is laid out. And then based on that, we'll work to make the building as efficient as possible. And again, you know, in terms of the assemblies that we're talking about, the difference in tens of thousands of square feet is not going to be a big cost on utility bills. I mean, yes, it's more material, but it's not going to operationally, carbon wise, it's not going to be a big driver.
Thank you. Dory?
Yeah, Dory Keogh, MacArthur Road. I have a quick question. It's a bit touchy to ask this, but not any of you were probably involved in the high school project. And I wonder, though, that you've heard a lot about it. Are there any takeaway lessons that you've incorporated? It sounds like you're in a really wonderful strategic planning, and thinking of all of the issues. But is there anything that you've learned from hearing about that process, which has left a little bit of an uphill battle for you people to fight? Thank you.
I'm going to take that one.
Please.
I have heard an awful lot about the high school project and tried to really absorb that over the last 2.5 years to better understand what caused what. The gift of Tim Holt being on this project and having been on the high school project, it gives me that little inner view to better understand what happened and when, where, and how. I think the biggest priority of all is the communication piece and making sure this is a very open process. And we overuse the word transparent, but I think it's the right word in this case, that the community is invited in very early and understands what's happening when. And I think this really incredible 17-member building committee is absolutely committed to that. And we can talk about it continually. Heather and Pat are in the room. They're the communications subcommittee. So I think the gift of designating a couple of people who are always in that mode, they are now, you know, as they hear progress coming up, they're the ones in the room reminding us of how are we gonna get that out? What's gonna be the forum? How are we gonna get feedback? And really the biggest daunting question continues to be how to, and this is why this is such a great opportunity, how do you reach the community outside of who don't have kids in the schools? And so we'd love more feedback on what those vehicles are. So I think that's the biggest, but I think too, the takeaway we learned also is that we need to really stay close to our OPM and our design team and be sure we really set guidelines and expectations of what we're looking for in them. The story I know of the high school project is that we had a certain design, it went out to bid and came back much, much higher than what the expectation was. They have been told directly that cannot happen again. We need to build a school with the cost estimates that are actually gonna fit what we get back from the construction companies. And I think that was a big part of the really robust vetting process for the teams of professionals that we are working with right now. And I have all confidence that will not happen again, but there's also a lot of checks and balances to make sure. So to me, those are the biggest two takeaways. And I think between the two, it sounds to me, the word surprise, I think was the biggest problem. Things happened without people knowing they were gonna happen, or the rationale being explained, or an inclusive process being created. And we're just not gonna do it that way. And hopefully you've seen that already in the last 6 months.
Thank you very much. Can I just take this opportunity to put in a plug? I'm Pat Nelson, and Heather and I are the communications team. We don't want to hear that we didn't reach people, or that the information that we put out wasn't understandable or wasn't accessible. We'd much rather hear a phone call or an email to the committee, I don't understand what you're saying, or you're not reaching the right people now,
Right.
than later. We're really very sincerely working very hard to make this accessible to people, but if we don't know why it's not accessible, we can't make changes. So you can email the committee, you can email me, I'm right over at Concord Children's Center, you can walk in my office. We wanna know, we really wanna know. Yeah.
I have a question, and I don't want to be the last one, so think of questions, okay? My question is based on the school committee meeting recently, and the option of having a special town meeting this far after Labor Day, when people are just barely coming home from whatever they did, is daunting. How do the schools or the committee or whoever, the ballot question committee, if it's out there, how do they intend to inform us if we do not have a child in the school, that there is this exciting thing going on?
Expensive thing going on.
Yes, expensive thing. You know, that window is small.
Yeah, and we did talk at a high level about this, and certainly Pat and Heather, as that particular team with that task, will continue to talk about it. I think we hit on some of what needs to happen, is that it's not just a conversation that happens those first couple of weeks of September, that it's a conversation that starts in the spring and ramps up, and once the dates are solidified, that it becomes a discussion that starts in the spring right on through September. Making sure we maximize the opportunities that come up through the summer and continue to reach out. I think we're willing to be anywhere and everywhere you ask us to be. I think we're gonna be putting documents together. We're using the technology. We need to know who that reaches and who it doesn't. We're working closely with the Journal to continue to put updates out that way. And then we need to make that next layer of solidified plans. There will be a second group that really takes on, because the building committee itself can only inform people. They're not allowed per law to have an opinion.
No advocacy.
No advocacy. So there will be another group of people that start to soon, I think, organize and become another vehicle of communication out. They will have an advocacy role, and I expect they'll be also part of the discussion. So we will do whatever you ask of us, and I think Pat's offer is correct. Help us know how to reach people so that we plan that now and can build it into the next number of months.
Thank you. I need a question that will leave us with joy. Yes, sir.
Robert Hilsinger, 102 Central Street. And I guess that has to do with the cost, although none of us want to bear the cost. But I also feel these communities of Holyoke, Fall River, and towns like that need good schools too. And I think as much as none of us really want to open our checkbooks, I think we also feel that those communities have an opportunity, and should have an opportunity to have an equal education like Concord has.
You're there.
So thank you for that observation, Robert. I don't know if it's quite joy, but it certainly is a positive note. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Concord Carlisle, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists. I would ask you all to please do as they have said and be engaged, ask them questions, send them emails. I don't know about going to their offices, but I'd also like to thank our wonderful moderator, Ruth Lauer, for keeping us on time and keeping us together. And on behalf of our league, I thank you for coming and hope we will see you at future programs. And don't forget, the Civics Bee on March 8th at 2 p.m. Come and see our wonderful middle school and high school students talk about voting rights. Yay. Thank you.